A secretary on the run for embezzlement takes refuge at a secluded California motel owned by a repressed man and his overbearing mother. On this Halloween day, we find the meaning in the madness of Norman Bates and of the genius of Alfred Hitchcock in his 1960 iconic masterwork that changed horror for all time to come, Psycho. And now, our feature contemplation.
Speaking Cinema with Andrew Schwartz.
Welcome to the Speaking Cinema podcast. This is Andrew Schwartz, your host, and happy Halloween, everyone. Today is All Hallows Eve. It's so exciting. This is one of my favorite days of the year, and we've been doing a Halloween series of 3 movies, this being the third, leading up to this night, or this day. So I hope everyone is creeped out there in a good way. And we've got an amazing, iconic movie that pretty much kind of stumps every other movie in terms of just how iconic and the extent of how influential it is. And we're going to talk about that. But we're talking about Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho today, and we have the ultimate psycho himself to talk about this with us. Returning to the podcast, I'm so excited because whenever this guy is here, we have just such a fun time, and he's so good at talking about movies, especially horror. We've been waiting all year for this, and we chose, I think, this perfect movie for us to have this really substantive conversation, and I don't think people have had a very substantive conversation in the way I think we're going to for maybe generations. And so I'd like to reintroduce one of our favorite guests on the show, filmmaker, writer, director, producer, Adam Seccafico. Mr. Horror himself. Adam, thanks for coming back on the podcast, and happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween, 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 happy Halloween, Silver Shamrock.
well.
Different franchise, but the sentiment remains the same. Happy Halloween, buddy.
You too. You got me. I have to admit, I'm a little creeped out, but sure. That's what's supposed to happen.
Halloween 3, Season of the Witch.
It's beautiful.
Man,
beautifully prepared. Very well executed. It's a 10 out of 10. Of course, the obvious, I guess, choice would have been to do Halloween, but instead we chose, I think, something that's even more precious is the word that I think I want to use. Yeah, because we could say even Halloween wouldn't have been a movie if it weren't for this movie.
You can make the argument that Halloween is a spiritual successor to Psycho in a lot of respects, and obviously,
absolutely,
from the casting, obviously, of Jamie Lee Curtis, the fact that the character Dr. Loomis is named after one of the characters in Psycho, among other things, and also it's really look. You talk about like the history of horror and how there's a pre-Psycho and a post-Psycho, and the kind of trajectory that horror took after Psycho. And yet, in an odd way, the slasher still needed time to codify, almost like Psycho was a little bit ahead of its time there.
Right.
So it really wasn't until, 1960 to 1978 that really another true slasher was made in Halloween. And obviously, Halloween owes a great deal to Psycho.
Yeah. And I think a lot of things do, and not necessarily in ways that people might expect, or it might be obvious at first glance. Right? And I think that's what us horror detectives are going to be useful for, right?
I mean, you also have, Ed Gein being a big inspiration on the book Psycho, and the other spiritual successor would be Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is the next film made after the Ed Gein kind of mythos.
Right. And even Michael Myers, because the mask sort of looks like, I guess, like a human skin kind of thing.
I mean, you know who that's supposed to be, right?
Well, I thought it was Ed Gein. Or am I confusing him with
the Michael
Leatherface?
Myers mask? The Michael Myers mask. I
don't know much about it. What's the legend behind it, real quick?
That's a spray painted William Shatner mask. Because remember, in the 60s, when nowadays, if you want to go as Captain Kirk for Halloween, you just buy yourself a Starfleet uniform and you just go, "Hey, I'm Captain Kirk." Maybe you get a hairpiece. But back in the olden days of the 70s, what you would do is you just buy a mask of the approximate likeness of whatever celebrity. In this case, it was William Shatner.
Yeah.
And they were going to do like a creepy clown mask like they were for the first, part of the film. And it wasn't quite working. So somebody just, I think it was Tommy Lee Wallace, the production designer, just got a Shatner mask, messed up the hair, spray painted it white, and cut the eye holes a little bigger. And Carpenter went, that's fucking scary as shit. And they used that mask.
Yeah. Now I know why I've been so scared all these years. It's
all
Bill
these years
Shatner.
of Shatner.
Wow.
Shatner.
That's incredible. I actually did not know that. That's amazing. Yeah, I'm going to egotistically try to make my assumption of Ed Gein try to work here and say, well, if I flayed off the face of William Shatner and then I put it on mine,
into a mask,
and fashioned into a mask and messed up his hair, that's sort of like Ed Gein. Wow, what do you know about that? I'm almost right. No, I'm not right at all. I'm completely wrong. But God bless Bill Shatner.
Indeed.
So this is the only podcast out there that's exclusively about the meaning in movies, and we're going to talk specifically about that. And in that vein, before we get to our overall takes on this movie, which is my individual idea of what I think this movie ultimately means and is about, and then Adam's separately, and of course we did not know what our takes were going to be before recording this, each other's takes, that is. But just before that, I'd like to ask you, Adam, what is it that makes you want to do this film for this podcast? What is the personal connection you have to this movie?
So take you back a few years when I was about 14, 15 years old, and my love of filmmaking is just starting to blossom a little bit. Mm-hmm. I had seen Die Hard by this point. I'd seen Predator. I'd seen, obviously all the big films, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, the kind of Spielberg, Lucas films. But I'm still not really knowing what a director does.
Right.
Now, I had an aunt who was very much into Hitchcock to the point where she had a parakeet named Tippy after Tippi Hedren.
Oh, wow. Sure. That's awesome.
And it had gotten to a point where all of a sudden this movie thing was starting to become something of substance and something I wanted to pursue. And so for Christmas, what she did was she got me two box sets. One was a public domain, kind of all of Hitchcock's British films. But the big one, and this is big for all you physical media aficionados out there, she got me a felt box known as the Alfred Hitchcock Masterpiece Collection.
Wow.
Which featured not the masterpieces per se, but all of his Universal films predominantly, one of which was Psycho. And I had heard about Psycho. I'd seen, like a Bravo, like the scariest moments of all time, and Psycho was pretty prominently featured for obvious reasons. But I'd never seen the film. And it took me a few months because I watched all the films in order. So I started with the 40s films and went ultimately 1960s Psycho. Mm-hmm. And again, with no real cultural context other than people think this was one of the scariest films ever made. And even watching it out of context, I wasn't quite getting it until I watched the film in full. And I can say this in no uncertain terms, it was the first really old movie that terrified me.
Huh. And just to be clear again, how old were you again when you first saw this?
14. Between 14 and 15, I think I was at that point.
Very formative.
So, yeah. Very formative. And Hitchcock, and there's a expression called the starter kit auteur that I've heard every now and again, which is the director you come to that you learn what movies are and what a director does. Quentin Tarantino is that for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Steven Spielberg is for a lot of people. Kevin Smith, who I love dearly, he's that for a lot of people too. And Hitchcock was kind of mine, where that was kind of, this is what a director does. And he's very into showing off. Again, Hitchcock was a guy who co-wrote the book on what a director does with Francois Truffaut.
Yeah.
He also was the first celebrity director. He had his own television show. He was, Alfred Hitchcock was a bigger star than the stars in his film most of the time. And unlike his contemporaries, your John Ford, your Howard Hawks, your Leo McCarey's, Hitchcock couldn't help but be himself. When you're watching a Hitchcock movie, this is an Alfred Hitchcock movie, first and foremost, beyond anything else.
Right.
And was really I wouldn't say the first, because there were obviously other directors that did have a bit of a recognizable style, but he's almost the first one that made it marketable, for lack of a better term, to have that kind of set in-house style.
Sure.
So a lot of my formative movies, I didn't get to see in a theater. I saw that either on television or somebody bought me a disc.
Right.
And because of that, that's kind of where, because I didn't love the movies coming out growing up. I feel better now, ironically enough, about films coming out, because I think there's a lot kind of coming out that's interesting. But I didn't grow up in a time period as a guy getting into films that nothing was exciting me in the mid to late 2000s. Just nothing was really doing much for me, so I had to go backwards to discover my film love.
So you went back to 1960.
In this case, I went back to 1960.
Wow,
yes.
That's wild.
And I went back to Hitchcock, which, again, I don't want to make it sound like, oh, these damn kids these days. It's Alfred Hitchcock. If you know, you know, and if you're into film, you're going to hear that name.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot of I've heard a lot of like filmies and intellectuals say, you want to learn everything about directing, just watch Hitchcock movies. You barely need to do anything else. It's
not just this one film. There's at least a good 5 films that he has that you can literally teach a film course in.
Yeah. So let's focus on this one because it's so iconic, like I said, and it has inspired millions of people, writers, actors, directors, filmmakers in general, and even just created a kind of entire modern take on the genre of horror. So let's examine the meaning here and see through the meaning what terrifies us about this movie and why it's so effective and important for our culture and important to us as people. Let's go into our overall takes. So like I said, folks, I'm going to go into my overall take, and then Adam's going to go into his. And then we're going to spend the rest of the conversation sort of, maybe challenging each other on each other's takes or underscoring what we've done. And we can always feel free to ask each other questions. And like I said, challenge each other and get as much out of each other's perspectives as we can. That's the fun of what we do here. Psycho Adam, I think, is an elegy for loneliness. It particularly focuses on the fragile vulnerability of the young male, in my opinion. And that's often underappreciated, and it's misunderstood, especially today. And it keeps sort of reiterating throughout modern history. But especially today, it further illustrates cycles of loneliness, passed down from, say, one parent to a child, or a sibling to a sibling, maybe even like Marion and Lila in the film, or even a lover to a lover. The movie sheds light on individuals without other significant figures in their lives, or at least they have them, but maybe they're not what they appear to be, or they're not fulfilling to this principal person for some reason. And therefore, that principal person is without purpose. They're without meaning. And they're without autonomy in their lives somehow. And the plot of the movie gives us the horrifying consequences of all of this all-encompassing loneliness. So Psycho is an elegy for loneliness to me. So what do you think about that quickly, Adam? And then what's your take?
I like that. I'll take that. Next time anybody asks me what I think of Psycho, I'm going to steal that. It's funny because I had multiple readings because I watched this film a couple times leading up to this, and I actually have a couple of readings on it. It's about how our parents fuck us up. I think that's the biggest kind of like the textual meaning of it.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously the big thing is Norman and his mother and the relationship that they had, which is the text of the film.
Right.
You also have a mention of Marion's mother when she's meeting with Sam in the hotel room, and the kind of the portrait of their mother watching them over as they have this kind of more formal dinner together in Marion's home, and kind of the kind of the watchful eye of the parent and what the parent expects out of you, and again, intentionally or unintentionally, how our parents kind of fuck us up. That's, I think, the text. You can argue the whole kind of, the seedy underbelly of Americana. I think that's a more kind of artsier take. obviously Marion is looking for respectability, and she'll obtain it through any.
You mean artsier than our parents fuck us up?
I mean, artsy in a sense of like what you would expect. Like, the guy with the brandy sifter going, oh yes, what I think it is. It's about America because everything is about America these days.
Yeah,
that kind of take.
Valid.
And kind of the falsities of respectability, and kind of Marion's attempting to get it. And my last take, and I think the take that relates to the podcast, because obviously all roads have kind of led to Psycho this Halloween season. And the 3 films that were chosen, I think, all have to do with traps to some degree or another. And I think Psycho is no different. I think that Cube is about the trap that you're placed into. Some sick freak knocks you out, puts you in a torture basement, and you're placed into a trap. I think that's what Cube is kind of about. The Ring is about the trap you fall into out of curiosity. It's the trying to place your hand on the piping hot stove, even though you know it will burn you, but there's something that just you can't help but put your hand on the stove. Psycho is about the trap that you fall into when you're not looking, or when you're running from something and you can't quite, watch where your footing is, and you fall into that trap.
Yeah.
In that literal sense. And the thing that kind of got me thinking about that was, and we're going to obviously talk about this in Scenic View a bit more, but the scene in the parlor between Norman and Marion. When Norman is talking about how we all live in our own personal traps, and he feels like in a way he was born into his.
Yes.
Even though I disagree with that, and we'll talk about that obviously later on in the podcast when we get to that point. And kind of Marion coming to this realization that she kind of fell into a personal trap too when she took the money and went on the run. But in actuality, she's in the true trap that she ran into, being the motel, and where she ultimately meets her untimely end. So I do feel like that's kind of the connecting thread of the 3 films that have been covered over Halloween. And if you want my personal take, I'm going to go with more of the parents, fucking you up, because I feel like there's more to mine from that take, personally speaking. Though I do like your take a lot about the elegy for loneliness.
It's very interesting. They definitely intersect
these
2 perspectives, for sure, because loneliness, it's hard to separate, our parents, even if the parents didn't force you to be lonely, say, consequences of bad parenting, I think, lead to loneliness, or a feeling of personal disconnect with other people, right? So it's almost as if, like you said, all roads lead to this place. But I do think that the film very specifically wants to talk about this kind of topic.
I agree, especially when the whole movie, at least when it pertains to Norman and Mother, there is a toxic codependence there with the 2 of them.
Yes.
So what happens when one of them dies? All of a sudden, it's that pit of loneliness that, create essentially Norman's disorder.
Yes. One thing that is interesting to me, I almost want to challenge a little bit about yours, is you said that Norman and his mother is sort of the text of the film. That's really interesting to me, because Norman's mother is never part of the film in an altruistic way. Her presence is through his perspective. It's through his lens. And clearly, he's this deranged, demented person. So we don't actually know what the only text that's in the movie of her is through Norman's, filtered through his consciousness. So I would kind of argue that there's no text of the mother, the true sense of the mother character. And because of that, that's why I leaned more into, it's general loneliness.
But let me ask you this. Are you thinking that as an all-encompassing thing, or as you're watching the film throughout, not taking the twist into account?
The loneliness being the all-encompassing thing?
Correct.
Yes.
Because I'm approaching it from the perspective of, if you're looking at the film linearly, Mother is very much a character in the film, even if she's off camera and more this ethereal figure.
Yes.
But she's there and very much present throughout the film. even in those little spurts, and she's very much the dominant force of the film.
I would argue that that is a different character. I really think that functionally, I think it should be classified, in my opinion, as a different character. Norman's idea of mother versus mother, how she truly, in reality, was before he killed her. You know, I think those are two characters, and possibly even the mother character is, you can sort of say it's subsumed by the Norman character, that Norman is one character and this is part of his character. Yes. So I think it's a lot stronger of a sense of this is about Norman verbatim versus this is about Norman and his mother, some semblance of the mother. I think that the mother could be part of him, part of his soul somehow, part of his perspective. But the mother character is I think very separable from who mother actually was. And because we have an unreliable antagonist in this sense, it's therefore an unreliable representation of who that mother was. I think we can glean things. But again, it's all assumption, and it's all through Norman's perspective.
Let me ask you this when it pertains to mother and that character versus Norman's personality. Mm-hmm. What do you think you can glean from Norman about mother that was factual? Obviously, like you said, unreliable narrator, and maybe she wasn't that much of a gargoyle in of itself, but you can definitely glean that they were codependent to some degree or another. At least during certain parts of their life. Obviously, the lover comes into effect. You know, the lover that Norman kills along with his mother.
Yes.
So it's like a sense of like it was just the two of them, and there was a codependency, and then a third factor came in. While can you sit there and say Norman's take on his own mother was accurate? No, I think there is a lot of other factors that go into it.
Yes.
But there is definitely a sense of codependency that where even though he murdered her, when she went away, something was lost. And I think that does tie into your sense of loneliness.
Sure.
So he literally, out of a sense of guilt or out of a sense of longing for companionship, he literally started imitating his mother as a result of that.
Yes. Now, if the question is, what can we glean as information about the objective mother character from Norman, I think almost nothing.
Really?
I do. I at least with confidence of really being able to say that we know confidently about what this representation is giving us. For the movie does not give us any clues that anyone in the movie, other than let's say maybe the sheriff who briefly talks about the mother, right? Although he only just says that she was murdered by Norman, and that's kind of when we learn that. But I don't think that we can. It's very hard to separate mother as seen through Norman as from mother through mother. There's just not enough information. The entire thing could be an exaggeration, let's say, of Norman's reaction to learning that his mother had a lover that he didn't approve of. Think about it. I'm not saying that I believe this to be the case, but given how demented and deranged Norman is and his condition, I think, Adam, one could make an argument that maybe Norman's mother was not nearly as overbearing as what I think is supposed to be implied here. Maybe she was sweet, a lot sweeter. Maybe she was a lot more respectful for him, and she didn't actually think he was bad and all of these things. But when Norman found out that she had a lover that he didn't approve of because he missed his father so much and this man wasn't his father, right? Let's say he just snapped and created this entire narrative in his head that she was this overbearing, this prudish, monstrous woman, that stark raving mad, which is really just a projection of himself. Maybe he was just thinking all of that as a justification to kill her.
Projection of his self-loathing.
A projection of his own faults and flaws. we don't know that that's not the case. That's what's so creepy here.
It is. And it's,
yeah.
And going back to it, like, I do feel as though, well, to your point, we can't really glean much of the relationship. It's either that or like Norman was always, to a degree, disturbed, for lack of a better term.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of think, all right, was he just like the kind of sociopathic kid that would like enjoy ripping the wings off of flies or something like that?
Yes.
And I do kind of like, again, Norman Bates as a character study, because if you think about, again, all roads lead to the, like, we use the phrase all roads lead to a lot, I feel like, in this podcast.
Yeah.
But all roads in the film lead to the twist at the end. And where it's all kind of come from. But like, it's funny enough because in this last viewing, I kind of bought into Norman's, kind of nice guy routine from everything up to the shower sequence.
Yes.
And I found myself this time around, like, he's kind of dorky. And I kind of found that endearing this time around. And there's a lot to Perkins' performance that, a lot of nuances and a lot of quirks that it's easy to like the guy to start with. And again, obviously you come in, there's this, the bring your own baggage folks, but you come in with this cultural knowledge that Norman Bates is one of the most notorious villains in the history of film.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time watching it, you're almost kind of spoiled watching it because all right, when's he going to put on the dress and when's the shower going to happen? And you're waiting for all of it almost. Mm-hmm. Having not watched this film in a number of years, I can now sit back and I can appreciate the performances more and appreciate Norman as a character more in a more nuanced way.
Exactly. And I think that this is a great segue into our title takes, because this is another thing we like to do here, to take the title and see what we can get out of it. We love talking about titles here, just because we're talking about Norman, Adam, and it's clearly a reference to Norman, this psycho. I'm just going to start really quick here because I want to say that I love the title, not just because it kind of created its own ubiquitous use of the term in the general culture, right? But I love the fact, like you were just saying, I also hadn't seen this in years and appreciated a lot more because of that sort of newfound, rediscovery of all of the beats and all of the things in the movie, kind of an experience. But what I love about this title is that everyone knows the title so well. Even in 1960, when it came out, everyone was talking about it, the news, the press. And from this title that it's descriptive of a character in the movie, right? Even before people knew much about Norman Bates, you're thinking about this title. Now, the story of the movie leads you to believe. This is one of the great red herrings of all time to me. It leads you to believe over and over again that the mother is the psycho. And I love that. I love how they lean so far into this deception. I think at the very first point, actually, I'll reverse even more. You think that perhaps Marion Crane might even be the psycho, the protagonist that you're along with. If you don't know the movie, why not? Right? She's immoral, and she starts out doing this naughty thing, and then she tries to get away with it, and then she starts to hear these voices in her head when she's driving through the car. Right? You just don't know. And then she arrives at the hotel, and this whole this dialogue sequence happens between Norman and his mother from afar, and Marion hears it. But again, back to the title. You don't know who the hell the psycho is until literally the end with the twist, because you think that Norman is covering for this woman the whole time. Okay? And in a sense of meaning, I think that this almost invented, at least it's not the first movie with a twist that's like this. There are other movies. It's an incredible French movie called Les Diaboliques. I think you might have seen it.
Which Hitchcock wanted to make himself, actually, at one point.
There you go, right? Because that film was 1955, and that's got an incredible twist, incredible filmmaking, 5 years before Psycho. Anyone that loves this, check that thing out. What an amazing movie that Criterion has put out, I believe, so you can go get that. But, this movie gave a new American power to the American idea of watching a twist unfold in front of your eyes. and the meaning of it resonating with you and creeping you out and changing your perspective on something. All these red herrings that are thrown out, the meaning of the twist, I think indicates that it almost puts the audience in the place of Norman, because you're so deceived so many times, so easily from this film, that you almost assume the character and the mindset, the perspective of Norman, because you're so easily taken and deceived, and you believe that the mother is the psycho. You believe all of these things that he's just covering for her. That's exactly what the character is. That's the emotion. That's the mind state of the character. So in a sense, you become the psycho. I know that might be a little bit of a push, but I think that that's what the title is great at doing when you don't know the movie too well and you're watching it for the first time. It's awesome. What do you think of this title, Adam?
I mean, to your point, Hitchcock's mastery of voyeurism made it so that the audience is implicated. So, again, the audience is becoming the psycho in of itself is, pretty spot on. I'll kind of jump off of what you said about, kind of which character is the psycho, and I'm going to go one further. I'm going to say the entire movie itself is the psycho, at least throughout the film, in a sense of the movie. And I picked up on this too upon rewatch and trying to put myself in the position as somebody in 1960 going into the movie theater and watching this. There's something about the film that's always a little bit off, as far as like the editing, the cinematography. Certain sequences feel different than the others. There's some parts of, even though the film is grounded in reality, there's some very big leaps of logic the film takes stylistically as well. And it's funny enough, because I don't know if you know this, and it's funny because I mentioned before the episode I didn't do much research this time.
Right,
but I'm going to get a little bit on purpose. But
yeah.
This kind of ties into my thoughts on the film and why I think that, Psycho is representative of the film as opposed to the people in the film per se, which I guess it's all encompassing. It encompasses the people in the film too, but I digress. Hitchcock went to the studio with this film and said, I want to make this. And everybody's like, Hitch, we love you. You're coming off of a big hit, North by Northwest. But like every time you want to be a little bit weird, no, it doesn't quite work. So why don't you just like, hey, there's this really nice, Ian Fleming novel called Dr. No that they're trying to make. Why don't you do this instead? But he was adamant, I want to do Psycho. To the point where he put up his own house as collateral, self-financed the film, and got his TV crew from Alfred Hitchcock Presents to shoot it.
Right. Wow.
So as a result of the fact, he doesn't have his usual, tools of the trade that he did in all the films leading up to this. Instead, he has a television crew. He has kind of a stock group of actors gently withstanding, Vera Miles was a star, but not to the extent that I think she wanted to be. Mm-hmm. But he didn't have that much of his disposal. And as a result, you have this kind of weird film that's almost half movie, half television in how it's shot and how it's cut, and how it looks. And it's very disorienting watching the film. And you don't know quite what the next scene is going to be as a result. So you can argue as a result, the film itself is a bit psychotic in its approach. Always a little bit off. And I can only imagine, like, look, we're spoiled because we've had this movie for how many years, but in 1960, walking into a theater and going, I thought I was watching a Hitchcock film. What the? And I'm liking this. I'm enjoying it, but the movie's a little bit off in terms of its look. And I've never seen a movie quite like this. Maybe like if I'm going to go see Breathless, which came out the same year, or see some sort of European art film, but not like an Alfred Hitchcock movie.
The idea of the sort of classical Hollywood narrative sparkling on the screen and giving you all of the cues that you're used to, right? And all of the character development that you're used to. And your protagonist is sticking with you until the end. And all of these stylistic things, right? And these choices that was just so par for the course when you watch the movie. But you're right. The movie is like frazzled and psychotic this way. It's like it feels disconnected. Even today, watching it. You're along for the ride. It's almost like you see the black and white. You feel the not the oldness, but you feel the sort of antiquity of certain choices and how it looks and all this kind of stuff. and you're just not expecting a movie to keep on innovating on itself as it goes. And I think you're absolutely right about that.
And kind of building upon itself on top of that, where you go in, all right, I'm expecting this. Wait, this happened. That's not. And now, oh my God, that happened.
Right.
And now where do we go from here? And all right, maybe this guy he'll be. Oh my God, he's fucking dead too.
Yes.
Like, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah, there's a there's like a pervasive counterintuitiveness.
It keeps throwing you knuckleballs. It just keeps throwing you that knuckleball over and over again.
Yep. Knuckleballs, sidewinders, curveballs. It's exciting. It's an exciting experience. And what a risk that is. I know it was a low budget risk, cost $800,000, like you said, but it
could have bankrupted Hitchcock.
It could have bankrupted the guy. And he was already a legend.
Personal risk. Yeah, he was already. This is, again, him at his height, and he has to make a calculated risk like this. Obviously, it paid off, and everything's great, wonderful, and fantastic.
Right, his biggest hit ever.
But it could have sunk the guy. And look, he would have recovered, because then he would have gone direct to Dr. No, or he would have done something else that would have kind of brought him back, onto his feet. But for him to make such a calculated risk based on a book that, while very popular, but like most other books that make great movies, was not a great book.
Yeah.
I think
you mentioned Hitchcock. Truffaut. Francois Truffaut hated the book. He thought it was miserable. He thought it probably shouldn't have even existed. It's almost like he couldn't understand how anyone could like it.
Right, but Hitchcock saw there's a murder in a bathroom, and boy, wouldn't that make a great set piece.
Right.
And kind of built the film around that. And that's what great adaptation is. It's usually, again, most great movies came from bad books, as the prophets once said.
That is so, but the book had the same title.
Exactly.
Right, so he kept the title and he just built on it.
He kept the title, he kept the bathroom scene. You know, and then he kind of threw everything else out and kind of built the narrative around that.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Yes.
And just a quick, tiny little sign-off thing about the title. I just love that since this movie came out, the word psycho is just so ubiquitous. If your ex is acting up, or your ex, texts you in the middle of the night saying, I need help, or whatever it is, you're like, God, what a psycho. And psycho was not in the public consciousness, the word. But now we say it literally all the time. I guess it's short for psychopath, right? Like a mentally deranged person, or a person with antisocial personality disorder. But just the word psycho, it still feels like, my dad uses it all the time to describe crazy people. It still feels like it's in fashion and fun to use. You don't say people say sociopath more than psychopath. Yeah, the full thing now, but they still say psycho all the time. Or like as an adjective, that was really psycho of you. That kind of a thing. Let
me ask you this, and we'll wrap up Title Take after this.
Sure.
Do you think Norman is a true and utter psycho, or do you think he's just psychotic? Because I actually read a little bit of an article before that, kind of trying to dissuade the two. What is he actually?
I think I would have to know more about the clinical definitions and symptoms of being a psychopath versus just being what was the other option? Psychotic. That's right. Aside from being psychotic, I think I have to go with psychopath, because there's just too much there. I think it has like a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle isn't a square kind of a relationship. I think that all psychopaths are psychotic, but not all psychotics are a psychopath. Correct. But in Norman Bates' case, I think that you have to call him, he's not just psychotic. I think there's so many things happening psychologically in him that indicate to you that it's not just that the man is psychotic. I think someone might be able to make some kind of an argument, but there's too much there for him to just be, a square. He's a square and a rectangle. He's both psychotic and a psychopath, in my opinion. I have to go with that.
That's as good an answer as I can think of, to be honest.
Plus, I might come back to that for the final sequence.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean.
Because I've heard multiple obviously people try to diagnose Norman Bates throughout the years, and it's, dissociative identity disorder is the one thing that kind of keeps coming back up. But to your point, there's a level of antisocialness to the character, so therefore I think psychopath would line up pretty easily.
Yes. I mean, in some respect, it's sort of the textbook definition, right? I mean, every character, it's almost like every character that talks to Norman either references how he's just hermetic and alone, or says to his actual face, "Hey, buddy, how do you stay here and be sane and not go completely crazy?" And then he just basically says, "Oh, my whole life is here." Essentially,
pretty much
just confirming that he is, yes, antisocial, and that it's all he's known and all he has been and all he will be. So it's just bizarre in a really exciting kind of way. But anyway, I would like us to get into the opening image here. So we also like to take a look at opening and closing images on this podcast. Very close look, and that is going to bring us into the in-between segment as well, scenic view, as Adam mentioned before, where we look at any scene we want to. But first, Adam, I'm going to summarize this opening sequence of Psycho, and then we're going to talk about what we think the meaning of it is. So, we open with Bernard Herrmann's iconic and electrifying score. Oh my goodness, what an exciting score. It's rhythmic and it's aggressive. The strings are sternly pulling us in, immediately into this picture. Okay, it's over a simple but enthralling opening credit sequence designed, of course, by the brilliant Saul Bass, who did other Hitchcock movies as well, like, Vertigo and so on. He designed all of this incredible, iconic art. And it's these vertical and horizontal lines that are sort of wiping on and off the screen in perpendicular fashions. And it's transitioning from title to title in black and white. And the main Psycho title appears normally, and then it kind of cracks in half, and it offsets left and right a little bit, and then it splits apart and separates. Really cool stuff. After the Alfred Hitchcock's director title separates, the vertical lines fade us into a wide establishing shot of Phoenix, Arizona. It pans to the right, revealing this panorama, the depth of the city. And the titles say, Phoenix, Arizona. Then, December the 11th, as it fades to a closer wide shot of the city. Then it zooms in toward an apartment building within the city. Then we fade into an even closer shot of the apartment building. And then there's an even more specific title that says 2:43 p.m. And I love this. It's actually spelled out in letters, 2:43. It's not even the numbers. It's kind of cool. We continually zoom in toward that apartment building's window, toward a specific apartment. The camera enters through the window and then pans to reveal Marion Crane, played by Janet Leigh, and her lover, Sam Loomis, played by John Gavin. Marion is lying on the bed, and Sam is standing next to her wearing only pants, no shirt. The two exchange flirty talk and lay on the bed, and they kiss passionately. Marion suddenly says this is the last time they should meet in secret, or maybe even at all. She doesn't like the shabby hotel, being secretive. Sam doesn't really take her very seriously. She says she has to go. Sam wants to see her again in public, pretty much as soon as he can. Marion wants to see him in a respectful manner. He responds by embracing her and saying he wants to see her in any way that he can. He says, I'm tired of sweating for people who aren't there. He says he has to pay his dead father's debts and his ex-wife's alimony. She tells him they should get married, but he has nothing to offer her. He's in debt and living in a storeroom behind the hardware store that he owns or works for. They both don't have much, but they have each other. Sam asks if she wants to stop seeing him and find somebody available. He's sort of joking while he does it. And then she jokes by saying she's thinking about it. He fakes being hurt. Then she plays hard to get, not answering when he can see her again, and instead leaving and telling him to put his shoes on. And then the scene ends. And of course, it fades into the where she works as, I think, a secretary. So Yeah, what do you think of this opening sequence, Adam? There's a few little nice nuggets in here. The very first image, of course, of I kind of consider the whole montage as the opening image, right? Of Phoenix,
Correct.
Arizona, and then zooming in toward this apartment.
Mhm.
And of course, the opening sequence that follows that between Marion and Sam.
So I have a book of like the top 100 noir films ever made.
Mm.
And Psycho is the last entry. Now, I've heard a lot of arguments over the years that the Psycho noir is not noir. And funny enough, the setup of the film is very noir-esque. And Tarantino, I'm citing Quentin Tarantino. I know I'm such a hack. What can I tell you? My film daddy fucked me up. No, daddy, I won't watch Shogun Assassin for the 80th time.
Your
But
film daddy.
no film daddy.
Oh, man.
But no, Tarantino once said with film noir, when it's in the 40s, you understand because they're coming out of a depression and you can understand why these people are desperate. But when you move into the 50s and they're still trying to do all this kind of shady stuff, then they must really be in trouble. And this is 1960. Well, 1959 is when the movie was shot, 1960.
Yeah.
So it falls into that kind of category where, you know, these two lovers kind of meeting in broad daylight in a shady hotel room. One's talking about, you know, the debts he has and they can't really get married because of all this baggage he's carrying. And she wants to become, you know, more respectable in their relationship. And they've kind of reached this impasse, which leads to the possibility of a crime being committed by one of the two. Again, a very film noir setup. You show these desperate people. You literally peek into their lives because, again, the voyeurism thing with Hitchcock. We all become peeping Toms in this scene. His words, not mine. And we kind of go from there. And it kind of sets it up as like, this is a film about initially desperation. And I do think that the take of our parents fucking us up, while, yeah, sure, an ex-wife is also cited, but like, who is one of the people that Sam is sweating that's not there? His father. His father left his son in debt. And now he has to kind of carry on that weight from his father. And because of this, he can't continue his life until his debts are paid off. And then, knock on wood, maybe his ex-wife gets remarried. So it's almost like his father from beyond the grave preventing Sam from being with Marion. And Marion, on the reverse of that, because you would think in the scene as it played out, if you're going, you know, just watching each scene in a vacuum, that Sam would be the one more desperate to commit a crime than Marion.
Yeah.
You know, Marion's kind of sweet and, you know, debonair and, oh, why can't we have dinner in my home under my mother's portrait and we'll boil a steak for three, me, you, and my sister. And wanting the actual respectable life where Sam feels a little more rough-edged to a degree. So I think already the film is setting you up thinking, all right, guys, it's one of these. You've seen a noir film before. Here's two lovers meeting in broad daylight and they're desperate to get their lives started, but they can't quite because of outside forces.
I mean, even if we haven't seen like an actual noir movie from the 40s or so, we know this trope from cartoons and animations and things that are using the trope over and over again. We know this. You're right. We've seen this before.
Correct. It's a familiar setup to hook the audience in to take the ride that Hitchcock's going to take them on.
Yes. Yeah, he even I think I even remember Hitchcock saying he called the first entire sequence, but set of scenes of the movie until Marion gets killed, or at least until she arrives at the hotel, as being a complete trick and almost useless. He says that himself.
That's and I get it. I don't think it's useless because obviously it serves a purpose. You know,
right. Well, to him,
but
to him, the purpose was to just throw everyone off so that the murder scene, the shower scene, could live in, well, I don't know, live in, you know, infamy, but so that it could have all of the emotional power that a scene could have.
That it was the impetus for, again, the shower was the impetus for Hitchcock wanting to make the film.
Yes.
So this whole first part of the film is just Hitchcock literally like a petulant child going, when are we going to get to the fireworks factory?
Yes.
That's literally this first section of the film, even though for what it's worth, like, it's the most compelling stuff in the film, all the stuff with Janet Leigh, in my opinion, because she's giving such a dynamic performance.
Oh, it's amazing. Oh, yeah, and I'm not writing it off. I don't necessarily agree with all of that. I do think that it's all basically just this big distraction in order to prepare you for the blind side of what's going to happen soon, but in the shower. But no, I absolutely think that everyone keeps calling this a horror movie, and I agree, it's a horror movie. But I do think that Hitchcock is doing what he does best, and he's known for throughout the whole movie, but in this first elongated sequence before the hotel, and that's suspense. Everything that he's giving us is so suspenseful.
Would you call this a genre flip movie, where the first half is one thing and then a pivotal scene happens and it becomes something completely different?
I think I would have to. It does start as this sort of character getting wrapped up in a situation. You know, we feel like we're watching Foreign Correspondent. We feel like we're watching North by Northwest, right? Or just other sorts of noir-y films that came even earlier. We feel like he's putting us on those rails, right? And then we're going. And it's suspenseful in that way. Right? We're following this character's journey. We know what all the elements are. It's a simple story. We relate to it. We understand her emotional impetus. We understand what she's thinking and what she's feeling through all the images, including the opening sequence, which I think very well establishes the inner thoughts of both of these characters. Right? They're talking about, I'm in debt. I need a load off. I need to pay my debts. I need to get out of this hole. You know, we understand the desperation from this opening sequence. And because of that, it's that sort of, I feel like I could be this character. And I'm sort of rooting for her, but at the same time, I know she's immoral. So there is a suspense and a noir-y, let's follow the thread of where this character goes with her sort of immorality and her first instinct. And it's not quite the right thing. And I do feel like we're watching a just normal Hitchcock suspense movie because of all that. And then he absolutely blindsides us. He spanks us hard. Not even on the ass, on the face.
I was going to say, Jesus, talk about film, daddy.
But not in a pleasant sexual way. In the worst way. But also the best at the same time. So maybe it is a daddy. I don't know. But it's all subjective. But no, I love being spanked in the middle of a movie. No, but what he does is very interesting. So I think we should go into or make our way toward that, because we're going to go into scenic view now. Because I don't want to say too much more about that opening. I think we get what we want from you said it beautifully. The voyeurism, welcoming us in, the noir scene that we're all used to. I think you said that very well. Scenic view. Let's jump to whatever scene that we want to, Adam, based on what we're feeling, where our defense is taking us. It seems that we keep wanting to talk about this shower scene, but I want to ask you, before we go into any other scenes, I've been asking every guest this. I think you sort of already answered it, but in a nutshell, in a small package that everyone can chew on, why is this movie so scary?
I think it goes to Hitchcock was a populist director. And you'll see that in flourishes, because there are certain scenes we'll talk about, i.e. the shower scene, that he could have done completely different, and he didn't.
Yeah.
He did it in a way that was still comforting to an audience, even if it was, again, this film is slightly always off a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the first part of the film wasn't particularly scary when I first saw it. It wasn't. Because I knew everything. I knew the shower. I'd seen the shower a bunch in of itself. It was excellent. Yeah. It was well staged. It was well everything. The very end of the film, with the reveal of Mother, and that shot of the prop turning slowly with the light overhead just perfect enough to cast a shadow in the holes where her eyes used to be. Yeah. I remember going, Jesus fucking Christ! by waking my neighbors. Because I
Yeah.
had no idea what that was, and I didn't know a movie that old could go that far.
Yeah.
And it did. And also, and this is a separate scene. This is earlier. This is when Lila and I'm not sure if Sam was with her in the scene, but they go to the sheriff and they're talking about, mother and Norman's mother, and the line, Norman's mother's been dead and sitting in that cemetery for 8 years now. And I always get a little chill because I love a good ghost story.
Yeah.
And it feels like that feels almost in a weird way like a climax to the film to a degree where you realize something's even further off.
Yes.
Because now all of a sudden, oh my God, this is a supernatural story.
Yes.
And you'd think that for a second. I don't think Hitchcock would ever go that far to do a supernatural story, but you feel that little twinge that, ooh, is this going to be like about she rose from the grave and is now stabbing people and whatnot?
Yes. And these are good specific examples, but if you were to concentrate this into like a sentence, why is Psycho terrifying? Why did all roads lead to Psycho for Halloween? Specifically with the scariness of it. Because we can't choose the final Halloween movie without it being a scary freaking movie. What, in a nutshell, makes this movie that scary to be this choice?
It's off-putting.
It's off-putting.
That's, if I could put one word, it is a very off-putting movie.
Yeah.
And in the best way possible. It's not like you're watching, a shock film, for lack of a better term, because I can't think of another name all the time in my head, but like you're not watching a John Waters film.
Yeah.
You're not even watching, another guy who maybe we can do like a Takashi Miike film, who came later on. This is off-putting in a sense of like, it's brilliant in its construction, it's brilliant in its filmmaking, but like what I keep saying, it's a little off and you don't know why.
Yeah.
And the entire time you're watching, you just feel uneasy.
And I think I think what you just said is the essence of the persona of Norman Bates.
Yes.
Right? Doesn't that come across? It came across to me. Even when he's being very seemingly normally flirtatious at the beginning, and he's very charming and cordial, there's something off. And the fact that there was able to be that element injected into the performance by Tony Perkins in this movie, the fact that he was able to get that little tiny piece of something's off across in the performance, and just that thing that you can't shake grows and grows and grows in this like nice crescendo. The fact that he cultivates that thing, that offness, and it grows in this like crescendo-y way throughout the film. It's a combination of masterful acting and I'm sure masterful directing by Hitch. It's cool.
Let me ask you this, sticking on the topic of Norman for a second.
Sure.
And kind of jumping around, because you can't talk about Norman Bates in full without jumping around, especially, this film. I don't think Norman's trans remotely, not only because of the speech the doctor gives at the end of it. I think that read is very wrong by people. Mm-hmm. I don't think he's transsexual. He's not transsexual, nor is he transvestite. I don't think he enjoys dressing up in women's clothes. I just think it's a coping mechanism because of his mother.
Yes, agreed.
But let me ask you this. Do you think Norman's gay?
No. I thought about that. I don't think that he is. Now, at first, I thought that there's a possibility that maybe the character is. But I thought about this argument that you could make. It's a great question. You could make the argument that as soon as, he had this, let's say he had this very overbearing mother that was very domineering and dictatorial toward him, and he was in the closet, right, gay, and he was absolutely afraid for this reality to show its face to his mother. And even beyond her, when she was in the grave, he still had to conceal himself in this way. And because of that, whenever he saw a woman that was, voluptuous, that should be arousing him, he went to this place of, oh, this woman should be arousing me, and I need to I need to switch into that gear, and but he doesn't have that gear, so there's a sort of short circuit in his demented brain, right, in his psychotic brain, and because he wants to be attracted to this person, the idea of the mother is imprisoning him and not letting him, so the friction between what he should be attracted to and what he really is and is not attracted to cause these sort of sparks, and it short circuits and he goes crazy, right? I think that you could think that, but the more that I thought about that, Adam, the more I'm just not buying it, because it does. We could talk about the actor, of course, right? Like Anthony Perkins, it was gay. Mm-hmm. And that definitely brought a really interesting element to the character. Very interesting. And it filled out that character with this sort of otherness, and it was very fascinating to watch that. And you can see this sort of incongruousness of those two elements, you know, that the actor himself brought this idea and this experience to the character, this isolation, this loneliness. But I really think that it doesn't make as much sense to me, and it doesn't have as much meaning to me when it comes to the Norman Bates character for him to be gay. I think you can draw the line, but I don't think that you need to. And it's not specifically a movie about gayness, in my opinion. Like, let's say Deep Red is Argento's film from 1975, I think. You know, that film is about sexuality and gender roles and all these different kind of things. I agree with you. I don't think that Norman Bates was a transvestite or a transsexual, for the same reason the psychiatrist says at the end. And I don't think that he was gay. I really think that he was
stunted.
Definitely stunted. He was childlike. There's great evidence of this. You know, at first I didn't think of this when I watched the movie years ago, but he eats candy corn throughout the movie, right? And literally 0 people, except for children, eat candy corn. No one except children eats candy corn.
And also, like they do when Vera Miles is going through the house and the climax, you go into Norman's room, and his room is very much set up like it was when he was a child.
Yes, the little creepy bunny thing, the doll, you know, all that stuff. I just don't think that it's a movie it's designed with that
in mind.
That in mind. I don't see the illusions to be strong enough. Again, you can make that connection if you want to, but I think that the stunted thing works more. And I think, again, whether his mother really was this domineering figure that believed that, you know, a boy shouldn't have these thoughts and feelings about this, you know, this disgusting woman, or, you know, whatever it is that he says as her, I think that you can just kind of see what's here, and you can say it's just all about him actually wanting to be attracted to these people in a normal way, but he can't just because he is psychotic. And I don't think that sexuality factors into it. That's just my take. It could even factor into my own take, which is about loneliness.
Right.
Right? And feeling disconnected from other people.
Somebody. Yes. Anybody at this point.
Right. But anybody is not necessarily just a man.
True.
You know, the movie doesn't seem to be saying things about gender and same-sex attraction to me.
Right, especially because you consider, with the exception of the detective, all of his victims were women, because they even mentioned the 2 women previous that they found in the swamp as well.
Yes.
That this always seems to happen when women come to the hotel and he starts feeling things, and then mother comes out. And
yes.
So I can see her taking that sense, but I also feel like Norman, to a degree, because of that stuntedness, is asexual. Like, he's incapable of it to a degree, or at least maybe not asexual is not exactly the word, but he's definitely.
I think he could be
impotent.
Asexual.
Impotent would be the word.
Oh, okay.
I feel like he would be impotent because of his psychosis.
Interesting. Yeah, but I think he absolutely could be asexual, because asexual obviously is very different than homosexual. And yeah, I'm just not convinced that the character is attracted to the same sex, but I can fully get on board with maybe he's not attracted to anyone at all, and he's really trying to understand this. Even though I really don't think that the film, again, goes into that territory. You know, I just don't feel like that's the meaning that's being whispered into my ear when I'm watching these scenes and this plot. You know, it doesn't speak to me as Norman doesn't. Maybe he's repressed, but as an asexual character, I think that he would be. It's not necessarily repression if you don't want the thing in the first place, right? That's a different sort of component. That's why I go on the side of the character is a heterosexual character, but he does not know how to leave the mother. You know, it's a little bit of an Oedipal complex in there as well. He doesn't know how to leave the mindset of being dominated by the mother and break free and be able to be a lover to a woman. Because remember, he also says a boy is not a substitute, like a son is no substitute for a lover.
Right.
Right. So he's even making the distinction to us in the script about the difference between a son and a lover, and how they're completely different elements, and they're fulfilling to another person in a totally different way. And it's as if it's a cry out for help, like, hey, I don't know how to not be a son anymore and become a lover.
Right.
And I think that's an essential element of that as well.
Or to the Oedipus point, I can't be a lover to my mother.
Yes.
You know, and as a result, again, like, say what you want about not knowing who mother was, but I do think there was definitely codependency, at least on Norman's part. There was definitely codependency.
I think you're supposed to at least assume that. I'll give you that for sure.
Yeah, and as a result, you know, when somebody else comes to the frame and he's now unable to be his mother's everything, essentially.
Yes.
That's kind of what drives him to murder in that sense.
Right. So with all of that, let's go to the shower scene. I think we're ready now. Because actually, everything that we've just talked about, I think, revolves around the shower scene. So what do you think about the meaning of the shower scene?
It's funny because I was
most famous scenes in history.
Oh, easily. Because I was actually going to talk about the run-up to the shower scene, the scene in the parlor that precedes it, because I think that does inform the shower scene quite a bit.
Let's go there then. Yeah, where he makes her the sandwich and they have that long conversation.
That long conversation basically about their lives kind of parallel to each other. And it's kind of my take of, I don't know if Norman is interested in Marion as a partner per se, but there's definitely a kinship, and it does speak to your thesis on loneliness, where it's finally company. Somebody I can at least talk to that isn't mother.
Yes.
And the whole, we are all, and, born into our personal, he's born into his personal trap, where we're all kind of stuck in personal traps, according to him. Even though, and this is where I said earlier, I'm going to fight back, because Norman wasn't born into his personal trap per se, at least from what we can tell. But by committing the murder against his mother and the lover, he has created his own personal trap that he's now stuck in because of his trauma, his PTSD that kind of created the mother personality. Now he's kind of stuck in this trap from here on in, simply out of the guilt of murdering his mother.
Yeah.
And he kind of, through this whole conversation and venting his frustrations, and Marion kind of coming clean about where she's been, and kind of this conversation allowing her to be like, you know what? I fell into a trap myself, and I'm going to go make it right. I'm going to do the right thing, go return the money, and hope that everybody's okay with it, because in actuality, I spent $700 of it, which I can pay back in time.
Yeah. Even
though she committed larceny and she's probably going to prison, but let's, for sake of argument, choose the happy route.
Well, they did say that they weren't. Lila says later on that they were not interested in prosecuting. They just want the money back. So let's assume that she wasn't going to suffer any bad consequences if she went back.
Even though the guy she stole money from was a nut, clearly, and I think he would have been like, well, the hell with that. my money, she stole it. But I digress.
But sure. Yeah.
But we wouldn't know because it's all a moot point because, after this scene, Marion decides she's going to take herself a nice, soothing, relaxing shower. And I'm sure, something happens after that. Somebody comes in, stabby. I don't really think it's that important to the story at all. Do you agree with that? It's kind of a minor scene in the grand scheme of everything.
Yeah, and it's not like it's culturally important either.
This is the first time I'd ever seen this scene watching this film again.
Exactly. I really like the performance of the shower curtain. That's the most interesting thing of the thing.
When she grabs onto the curtain and it falls down.
The way that it separates from each ring is just phenomenal. I mean, Janet Leigh's okay, but
its own stunts.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Going back to the whole film noir genre flip thing, this is the midpoint of the film, and this is where the genre flips to now. It's strictly a horror film from this point on.
Right.
And arguably, Hitchcock kills the noir film with this scene.
Mm-hmm.
She's had her come to Jesus moment, for lack of a better term, Marion.
Yeah.
She's now literally taking a shower, which is supposed to be cleansing. It's supposed to be kind of washing away the filth and the dirt of her crime, essentially.
Right.
And she's on the road to redemption. Then all of a sudden, somebody slowly comes in. We can't quite make it out against the shower curtain. Shower curtain comes back, and this silhouette figure, it looks like a woman in a dress, comes. We know the music, we know the scream, we know the cut sequence, all of it. And it's in that moment where, and that's the beauty of the film, where now fully, I don't know what the hell is going to come next. The main character just got killed.
Right.
All of a sudden, this kind of very restrained film, even if a little bit off, has just jumped the rails completely. And now, as the audience member, I don't know what's going to go on from here on in. It is an out-and-out mystery. I don't know who that was, conceivably. We know now with the history of hindsight.
Yeah.
Is this old lady really real? And is she actually killing people? And if so, what the hell? And just the disorienting nature of it. And it upends the film completely because there is the film before that, this kind of noirish feel of this woman on the run.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like that movie ends in the scene in the parlor.
Yeah.
Because now she's going to go back and all will be made right. And she learned a good Christian lesson about not stealing, no matter how desperate you are. And it's funny because I always feel good horror is usually morality plays to some degree or another. Like good horror films, good horror stories are usually a good guys escape, the bad guys punished with some cruel and unusual kind of fate.
Right.
And you learn a lesson at the end.
Right, a morality tale.
In Hitchcock Truffaut, reading it back before we talked, he keeps calling Mary, the poor girl.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usual Hitchcock vernacular. I'm sure he called, the poor girl about many of his heroines. But Marion specifically, because it's almost like he's insinuating he doesn't believe that Marion deserved her fate.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a situation where I'm kind of inclined to agree. Because while she did commit a crime, she did, but it's not like she committed a crime worthy of murder.
Yeah.
She didn't deserve to die. And I feel like the audience felt that way too. They had to have felt that way.
Sure.
She stole, but she came to her senses. Now she's going back.
Yeah.
And yet, in the scene that comes after this, and this is where Hitchcock plays his audience like a fiddle the entire time, when Norman is cleaning up his mother's mess, and he gets rid of the body, and he brings the car, puts in the body into the trunk, drives the car out to the swamp, is going to drown the car.
Mm-hmm.
That little moment where the car is going down, and it stops. And Perkins gives this look like, oh shit, now what?
Yeah.
The same audience that probably would agree Marion didn't deserve to die are now rooting for Norman to get away with it.
Right.
To get away with the cover up. And
great moment. Amazing moment.
Because again, it's the audience being implicated. Yeah, sure, we wish, that Marion didn't die, but we also want Norman to get to get away with it. And the reasoning I feel that way is because the story is so damn good.
Yeah.
And I kind of get a little bit iffy on certain logic leaps an audience will take, like, oh, why did the person go into the house? Clearly the killer is in that house.
Mm-hmm.
Well, because the narrative has to keep fucking going. That's why she goes into the house to ultimately get killed. But when it's a good story, the audience isn't going to question it.
Right.
Just like, hey, wait a minute. Why am I rooting for Norman why am I rooting for the car to go into the swamp? I was just really sad that Marion got killed. Oh my God, am I just as bad as, Mother or Norman in this case?
Right.
The audience is implicated. So it's funny because, yeah, sure, the shower scene, iconic. We love it. But it's the context around it that gives that scene its power.
Yes, for sure.
It absolutely is. The scene before it and the scene after it, or the sequences rather.
And that's what makes it so meaningful. This is since we're talking about the shower scene, this is a great opportunity for me to expound a little bit on my take, the elegy of loneliness that this movie is. So I think that, because you were posing a lot of interesting questions that I think the movie demands of us when Marion Crane dies halfway through this movie. Why? Did she deserve it? What is actually going on here? All these things. I think it's all of the characters' woes in this movie, including the mother and so on, are all leading toward this idea of loneliness creating vulnerability. And then the characters start to take advantage of each other's vulnerability. Well, really the main villain in the movie, which is Norman, right? So I think it always goes all the way back to, obviously Norman is lonely since he's 5 years old. He's missing his father because his father dies when he's 5, right? Mother, who we never actually meet, is lonely in the way that Norman describes that a son, is not a replacement for a lover, right? So mother is repressed and lonely for all these years without the father, trying to raise little Norman. And then Norman is even more lonely yet again when mother starts to date this other man. So then very lonely Norman kills both of them, creating a situation where he's even more lonely now because mother is gone. So at his ultimate point of vulnerability, that's what initiates him to dig her up from the grave, or, well, not dig her up from the grave, but put weights in the coffin or whatever it is to do a switcheroo and to keep the corpse there and to create this narrative alive in his head. Meanwhile, Marion Crane, who in the opening image, the opening sequence, basically tells us, let's get married. She's telling us she wants to get married to this guy. And he's saying, I'm sorry, I can't do that. We don't have enough. We have to wait. We have to wait. And they both have debts to pay. And I think she's feeling her own version of lonely by way of unhappiness as well, which is what they talk about at the beginning in the secretary's in the office, right? She says something along the lines of, "Oh, well, it's not Marion, but it's the crazy guy that gives the $40,000 cash to her, says that you can buy off unhappiness." Yes. It's this idea that you can take the negative emotions in your life and you can just throw money at them and then everything's going to be okay, right? But so she tries that, and again, what does it do? What does the instinctive thing do? It does the same thing to her as it does to Norman. It makes her more lonely and isolated and unhappy. So instead of creating a character in her head like Norman does, what she creates is an immoral, untenable situation for herself. So to me, you have this like trifecta of lonely characters. You have the mother, you have Norman, and you have Marion. And to me, the common thread among all of these characters is their isolation and their disconnect from other people for different reasons. But it's the loneliness of each of them that brings the three together in a way. And it causes this tragedy. And it causes the ultimate inhumanity and psychoticness of Norman. That's my take on the shower scene. is that it's all of these elements of isolated characters coming together. It's the effect. It's the final result, the final horror of it all coming together, and it's like a check being cashed finally, where he goes absolutely insane and murders someone, and then that ends up being the undoing of Norman. Because that's through Marion, he's found out, the detective and Sam and the sister and all this stuff. So it completely undoes everything. So that's why I think that the movie is really about this underneath it all.
But the irony to that being is, while Marion is cutting herself off and isolating herself and going on the run, the difference is she still has people who care about her in her life, namely right. Sam and Lila.
Right.
So while the shower is a culmination of all the factors that you said, it's the fact that Norman's undoing, it comes from the fact that Marion while she may have been lonely in that moment, she wasn't alone.
Yeah.
She had people in her life that would miss her and would scour the ends of the earth for her, to be quite honest.
Yes, but you get this sense it's too late, right? The loneliness brought her there, and it's almost like a Final Destination thing. It's like, but it's too late. Like, you're already marked. You've already gone too far into that crevice.
You already fell into the trap.
Yeah, right. You're too deep into the trap that you can't get out. The elements are already in play that are marking your death, and that's the sort of unfortunate part of the moral fable of this story. It's like, hey, Marion, you never steal the cash in the first place. You never meet the bad Norman Bates, right? So it's one of those kinds of things. Once she arrives at that hotel, once the rain obscures her vision, but there's this seemingly beautiful sign. Yay!
Innocuous sign, even
Bates Motel that just appears in the obscurity of the rain. She's done. She's done at that point.
Common name, just little flashing neon. Could have been called the Smith Motel just as easily as the Bates Motel.
Right. She's arrived at her death.
If you want to get even deeper into it, the whole, destiny versus free will, and was this always going to be the outcome for her, or was it, again, the simple choice? Fork in the road, take the money, don't take the money. She doesn't take the money. Granted, she has to, maybe wait out with Sam a little bit longer, but maybe they get to where they want to go to in the end.
Yeah.
But because she decided to take the shortcut, that led her down the other path. And ultimately, she could have reneged. She could have, let's say, she reneges when she gets pulled over by the cop. Mm-hmm. Who say that cop's not a maniac in his own right. And no matter what she was going to do, because she made that choice, she was going to be a sticky ending. And we can, like I said, we can argue
that gets into the Final Destination, determinism by whatever way we can, sort of argument.
But it's also the thing too, and that's filmmaking in a nutshell, isn't it? Her ending is going to be whatever the filmmakers want her ending to be.
Right.
So they've decided her fate well beforehand.
Right.
And again, Andrew knows my feelings on this. I chafe very hard about how important we treat directors, and I chafe against the phrase artist a lot. But I understand also, just even talking this out, why some directors have these weird fucking god complexes. Mm-hmm. And it's talking like that. It's, again, the whole free will versus, fate. When you're telling a story and you're the one concocting that story, you know what the fates of these characters are.
Yes.
And Hitchcock, being arguably the most omnipotent director ever, as far as his fingerprints all over his creations.
Yeah.
And even in the worst Hitchcock films, you can still see his fingerprints. You can still see his construction in it.
Yeah.
But yet, when he refers to Marion as the poor girl, there's kind of the sense of, maybe I went too far there.
Mm-hmm.
maybe a regret of the creator in the sense of, yeah, she did wrong. Yeah, she was going to be a sticky ending. But damn, did it have to be that? Like, almost he feels guilty about the shower scene to a degree.
But you know what? Same for the other two, I think it is, women that Norman killed previous to Marion. Right? So I think that as hard as it is to watch a movie and to expect what all of the, all you see all of these movies and you have all these tropes and cliches in your head, and as hard as it feels, as painful as it feels as a viewer to watch that character that you don't think deserves to suffer like that on screen and die, I think it says more about the psychoticness of Norman than it does whether or not Marion deserved this or not. I actually think it's a more interesting question to say just how psychotic is Norman and what is the psychology of Norman that drove him to do this, as opposed to, did Marion, the character we just happened to be following, deserve this or not? Like, what about the other two? Right? Maybe the other two deserved it even less. Maybe they were just happening by on the way to their, their old granny's, birthday party or something. I mean, there's no immorality happening there at all in that case.
Right.
So, again, to focus on why Marion, why does she deserve? I don't think it's about the question of Marion Crane deserving it. I think he's definitely saying something. He's slightly saying something by her being immoral in the first place and all that stuff. But I think that's why that shift happens that you're talking about. The genre shift. It's because we're shifting perspectives on what the story is trying to say about character and make us think about. I don't think it's commentating about Marion's character once she gets killed anymore. It starts commenting about the Norman character. That's the shift. That's why it's horror and not just a suspenseful moral story. It's about the psycho. It's not about the broad. That's why the movie's called Psycho and why the movie's not called Woman Who Might Be Immoral. So that's why that shift happens, and that's why it takes you by surprise. The perspective completely changes, and therefore the questions that I think that we should be asking, that are the most meaningful questions, change at that point along with it.
Let me ask you this.
Okay.
Who is the focus of the film? Is it Marion or is it Norman? Is Norman the main character of this film?
I think it's Norman. I think that the entire opening sequences leading up to her arriving at the hotel, I think you could almost draw this inference that it might even just be, I'm not saying it literally is in part of this in the story, but it's almost as if with that opening image, right? The voyeurism going through the window. It's almost as if Norman isn't imagining the entire opening up to her coming. It's almost as if you can say it's just his own mind constructing all of the elements that lead to her coming. And when she finally arrives, he just sort of puts this narrative together in his head, and that's what she is. Because like Hitch says, it doesn't really matter what she is. It matters that he is psychotic. That's the most important element of the movie. And that's, again, why it's called Psycho. So I don't think that she is the lead character. She's just another one of his victims. Yes.
So the whole movie is about Norman, and arguably,
yes,
when she pulls up to, because we do talk about, you kill your protagonist halfway through the film.
Yes.
And it's almost like Norman, well, not the protagonist per se, because I don't think he's really ever pulling the story forward. I think that shifts a couple times in the second half. But he never stops being the focus of the movie after she arrives at the base motel.
Right. Because he's in his own little world, and that's what matters. The loneliness of it. Like I said. And like Arbogast says, the private investigator, he says, I've been to so many hotels and motels. This is the first one that looks like it's hidden from the world. Right? I think that once you get into that hotel, that motel, it's almost like it's so hidden from the world that it's all the world actually is. Again, not the text of the story, but the subtext, sort of metaphorical inference, is that the only thing that really happens is what's in Norman's mind. And he's just sort of messing with these characters because he's so repressed and so lonely, and the desperation is so, again, it doesn't actually happen, but it's as if everything that comes before her arriving is just in Norman's head, functionally, for the movie, because it's so closely tied to the Norman perspective, and the Norman character is the wizard behind the curtain, controlling everything.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's funny because I want to make one more mention of the shower scene before we move on.
Sure.
On the disc that we both have, there's a sequence just called the shower scene, in which it shows the shower scene with the music.
Oh yeah,
Bernard Herrmann's score and without.
Yes.
And I watched that featurette, and I watched it both ways, and it made me think about my point of like Hitchcock ultimately still being a populist director, because that scene with Bernard Herrmann's music is still like exhilarating. It's shocking and terrifying, but it's exhilarating because the score is, being propulsive and it's moving the scene.
Yes.
When you watch it without, it's even more shocking, and you feel bad watching it almost.
Yeah.
It feels very much like a European scene.
Yeah.
Which, there's another film that came out in 1960 from another British filmmaker called Peeping Tom.
Oh, yeah, I love that movie.
Directed by the great Michael Powell, and it was also the film that killed Michael Powell's career.
Yeah.
And I thought about that too, and, these films are very similar. How come one was this monumental hit while the other one was this kind of nadir and almost put Michael Powell out of the business completely?
Yeah.
And the conclusion I came to was, and I came to this while watching the shower scene without music, and it feeling kind of almost like, again, like a Roman Polanski scene as opposed to an Alfred Hitchcock scene.
Sure, that's a great way to put it.
And it's because Powell left you in the presence of the killer the entire time. It was from the perspective of the maniac killing all these women.
Yeah.
Hitchcock was smart in the sense of like, look, I like torturing an audience, but I'm not malicious towards an audience. So that's why, while, to your point, Norman is the focus of the film and the epicenter of the film, he's never the driving force of the film. You leave Norman. You're never in with Norman too much, because I feel like if you're with Norman too much, you'll start to get uncomfortable. Your skin will start to crawl. So he uses Norman effectively to the sense of, again, distance makes the heart grow fonder. Use him sparsely. Use him.
Yeah.
It
also makes him seem even more isolated.
Yes, because people have to go to Norman.
Yes. Including the audience.
Exactly. Arbogast has to go to Norman after Marion is killed.
Yeah.
Then Lila and Sam have to go to Norman after Arbogast disappears suddenly.
Yeah.
But they know now there's something weird about that Bates Motel and whatnot. But again, we as the audience have to go to Norman, but we don't live with Norman.
Right.
And I think that's a big thing. Just like putting music in that shower scene, because while Hitchcock, again, will torment an audience, will leave them in suspense, knows enough not to be like the entire time.
Yeah.
With them.
Yeah.
And as a result, we're rewarded with this kind of roller coaster experience as opposed to this weird, creepy character study. And again, I love Peeping Tom. And it's a great film.
Me too. Yeah.
But I get why people had a problem with it in 1960. And why they loved Psycho when it came out.
Yes. It's a very dynamic experience. I think that the roller coaster analogy is very fitting. It really is like that. The ins and outs, the highs, the lows. And just there's some certain shots of Norman are just absolutely brilliant. Like, it's one thing that a movie has this reputation. Oh, it's great. It's amazing. It's changed the world and everything. And you're like, oh, okay. But I'm watching this movie and there are certain things that happen and I'm just like, this is just phenomenal. You know, like that amazing shot where the camera tracks toward Norman and he's just standing outside of the hotel looking outward, you know, and then he kind of looks, the camera just tracks toward him, and then he just looks toward the camera, not directly at it, but you see like his obscured in darkness face. You know what I'm talking about? He's almost
Yes.
silhouette, and he's just standing there. And it's just phenomenal. It gives you so much meaning and context about the character without any dialogue and any action. It's just atmosphere and well constructed composition.
And the silhouette rhymes with the shower scene.
Yeah.
If you think about where it's like, yeah, how much do we know about Mother? But it's also like, how much do we know about Norman at that point?
Yeah.
He's another figure kind of hidden in shadow.
Yes. And they're silhouettes of people.
Yeah.
You know, the whole idea of a silhouette is that you get just a basic shape, right? But you don't get any detail inside. And that's what these people are doing. That's what he as soon as someone gets too close to Norman, I feel like he feels spooked. And I feel like that's when the emotion kicks in, and then that gets the whole Mother character inside his head going, which starts to drive all of the craziness. So he prefers to be lonely and hermetic up there. And that's what these silhouettes are saying. He lives in the shadow. He's almost like a vampire. It's wild how much we get from a lot of these constructed shots and scenes. And Adam, there are so many scenes in this movie that we didn't get to, but like my favorite scare in the entire movie, which still scares the shit out of me, but it really scared me the first time, was Arbogast's death.
I wanted to talk about that scene too, because
let's do that quickly, and then we'll get to the end, because that overhead shot, that ceiling POV shot, where the music comes in, and then the Mother just swings right out of the room, out, and just stabs the crap out of him, and he falls down the stairs. Let's talk about this. What did you want to say?
Because I've had a very weird fixation with that scene, because I remember distinctly watching it at again, the Bravo 100 scariest moments of all time. And obviously the shower scene was in there, but they would always in those countdowns show a supplemental scene.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, it was the Arbogast, staircase kill. Out of context, when I was, 14-year-old little shitty Adam, just that's how I talked, folks. It's so unrealistic. What the greatest directors that that's what I was thinking.
Yeah,
I was thinking, for a movie that's supposed to be this scary thing, to have this shot of this guy falling down the stairs, and it's, what the hell is Hitchcock doing here? This looks fake as hell.
Right.
And yet, when I watched the film for the first time, I became low-key fascinated with that scene even more than the shower scene.
Mm-hmm.
Because at that point, again, you've been so disoriented. And you're now finally feeling like, all right, I'm at least on a little bit of footing, because I guess Arbogast is going to be our new protagonist.
Yeah.
He's going to be the one that kind of solve the case and find Norman and stop everything.
Yeah.
And all that good stuff. And he ends up at the motel. He's kind of snooping around the house. And just the suddenness of it all. Like the shower scene, the suddenness of it all.
Yeah.
Just out of nowhere. And unlike the shower, where the shower disorients you because it's this moment of pure vulnerability.
Yeah.
This is just because this isn't supposed to happen. No, This is our guy now. And you're telling me, but we just killed the lead before. Now this person's pushing the narrative forward, and all of a sudden he's dead too now. And in this shot that I'm still trying to get my bearings, because he's just going down the stairs, backwards, and he's trying to grab onto something, but he can't. But he's doing these ways where he's flailing, and even the shot's disorienting at that point.
Yes, it is.
Within the context of the film, this film is already, its main goal is to disorient its audience. This is the most disorienting shot in the film.
Yeah.
Because for a film that was so set in reality almost to a cinema verite style throughout this entire thing. This is the one moment of artistic liberty, let's say, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
That you just put your hands up and go, all right, well, now what? And I also think that in time that shot of Arbogast falling down the stairs has become so arresting that when I made my first short film, Posthumously Yours, I wanted a shot like that.
Yeah.
Very badly. The problem is we had no money to pull it off. So I waited literally years up till recently where I finally got to do a stair shot like that. In a 48-hour film challenge that we did, we finally were able to do some variation on a stair shot from Psycho, and I was very happy when we got it.
Yeah, it's really difficult. It also reminds me of, did you notice in that earlier in that sequence when he goes up the stairs, it's sort of like the slow reverse mechanism of, the down the stairs, right? There's like it's not disorienting in the same way, but there's this like sheer curiosity and suspense that's created from that shot when he's going up the stairs slowly, and Hitchcock like pulls the camera like away from him and zooms out. It's something like that. It's almost like what he did with Vertigo, which is now considered the Vertigo shot.
That push
like
pull,
a push in and zooming out at the same time. He does something else that's interesting with that moment, and it's just sheer curiosity. Like, I know that I'm going to discover the secret now, but I have no idea what that's going to look like. And for some reason, that's Arbogast's head. You get his inner workings of his mind from that moment, from that shot. And then, like you said, you get the same thing in reverse after he's so disoriented and falling down the stairs. And that moment is also very elongated. It also reminded me of like they make fun of that in Death Becomes Her. That's a Zemeckis movie where when Meryl Streep falls down the stairs, when Bruce Willis pushes her down, and it's this ridiculously long, like her bouncing down the stairs kind of thing. It makes fun of this, but it's using a sort of this trope. It's elongated when he's like trying to grasp onto something, but he can't. I also thought of it as like he's also putting all the pieces together in his head. Also, he's like, oh my God, it's the mother. She's the murderer. That's what's happening. This is the answer. This is what was missing. This is what was wrong. I felt it. I knew it. It's like he's understanding the twist in the story that he was trying to put together. But at the same time, he can't get a hand on the railing to stabilize himself. It's all of that stuff happening at the same time. And again, the fact that a director could get all of that information in an action shot during a sequence like this is breathtaking.
Let me ask you this, because this thought literally just crossed my mind. Arbogast clearly had a better visual of the killer before he died.
Yeah.
Marion, it's a little bit trickier because you had, the shower and the water, and I'm sure she was partially blinded and whatnot at the moment when she was showering. Mm-hmm. But do you think that either of them, before they died, realized who the killer was in actuality?
That's a really good question. Although I'm going to kind of give you a disappointing answer. I really don't think it matters too much.
Not really, no, but it's fun to think about.
It's fun to think about. It's a nice little curiosity thing. I think that they definitely shrouded Norman in the shower scene very well with that shadowy silhouette, which is we're sort of seeing her POV of Norman as the mother in the shower scene when he's a silhouette. So I'm assuming that she just saw the silhouette and couldn't really make out that it was Norman, right? Because that was very meticulously sort of planned by Norman, and it wasn't spontaneous. But like you said, Arbogast wasn't sort of like, it was a more complicated kill because it wasn't supposed to like sort of happen. It was like a last minute sort of like Norman escaping the motel as soon as he knows that Arbogast came back and threw the dress on. It's like, oh God, I have to get
he had to improvise.
He had to improvise. So because there was a lot more lighting and so in there, I think maybe he saw that it could have been Norman, but I don't think that he saw him from for long enough to even really make it out. It was so disorienting. So I'm going to say no to either of them. I just don't think there was enough time for him to process it.
Right. It's just
Arbogast.
right. Then like, oh, look, this one. Oh my God, I've been stabbed in the chest.
Yeah. But again, that's the creepiness and the scariness of it all. Like you said, these are such spontaneous, out of nowhere choices and kills. And I think that's something else that also has stuck very firmly with the modern horror genre that came after this, is spontaneousness. It galvanized the way for the giallo, the Italian slasher movies of the 70s, commandeered by Dario Argento and his
Mario
contemporaries.
Bava being the one who basically by trying to not copy Psycho per se, but like was given the incentive, hey, make something like Psycho. Made
Sure.
And
then
Girl Who Knew Too Much was considered the first Jolly.
Mm-hmm.
And it created a whole genre over it. And here's the funny thing: Italy, they owe more to Psycho, at least in the immediate aftermath of Psycho, than the American film market did. Like I said, It took a while for it to kind of coalesce because while horror was definitely considered bankable, they would, more often than not, they would still stay in the more supernatural element, namely like demon possession stories became all the rage.
Yeah.
Post Psycho of all things.
Right, but again, those are shocking, spontaneous things that make you uncomfortable. This entire movement of the mask covering the things, again, silhouetting, shrouding in darkness, or hiding a secret identity. And of course, later on, De Palma in 1980 with Dressed to Kill, which is basically his Psycho, which you know plenty about. I mean, it really galvanized the way for the shock being the thing that drives the core driving factor of what's stunning about the movie and titillating about it. But what we lost is a lot of meaning in that shock. Now we have horror movies that shock to shock because the sort of regress of we need this novelty to keep shocking us and to keep exciting us in a purely, stimulating and novel, emotional kind of a way, as opposed to examining the meaning of why something is shocking or why something is shrouded. And that's the most exciting thing about, I think, what we've been talking about today is the meaning of why Norman is shrouded in that silhouetting darkness. And again, to me, what can be more indicative of an image of loneliness than Norman covered in shadows, not able to escape from that motel?
But it's just weird to think about, like, for as much as now kill counts are lauded in film, and slashers in particular, there's only 2 kills in Psycho. Yeah. I mean, there's 2 more that happen off camera that we don't see, but there are 2 that we see, and they're spaced out, relatively far apart, where now... Yeah. And it's just, look, it's sign of the times, usually... Well, the
mother and her lover, too.
So it'd be... I'm only counting what we see.
Right, and that's the important thing. And that's what's exploited now. Is what we do see.
Because now we do see everything, and also things are sped up to where now there's a mechanism where you want to kill a slasher film once every 10 minutes.
Yes.
And
there's a quota to fulfill. You're not pioneering a new genre anymore. You're just trying to satisfy an itch.
You're trying to one up the kills more than anything else. Which look, I saw Terrifier 3. I love Terrifier 3.
Mm-hmm.
Great
example.
But it's a film where the artistry there is in the kills. Yeah. And I think even if you talk to the filmmakers, they're going to be like, yeah, absolutely. Like the story, while we're invested in the lore and the mythos of art and kind of the grander tapestry we're weaving, when you're talking about scene to scene, it's like, how can we top ourselves with the kills?
Right.
And why I do love horror as much, because horror is ever evolving.
Yes. It's constantly elevating itself.
Constantly elevating, yes. And it all started with Psycho. And it's funny to think about in terms of its context of the times, too. You have to remember this. Hammer horror really started in 1958, 1959 with their versions of Dracula and Frankenstein. And it's funny because everyone was talking about in all the making ofs for Psycho that I watched, how outdated and passe the vampire in the castle. And yet those movies were very prevalent in Europe at the time and now beloved.
Yeah.
But it's almost like they were a little bit behind the times. And I'll say this, America is always at the forefront of film. It always is. And everybody else is kind of playing catch up.
Yeah.
But just like how I love Frankenstein, and Frankenstein is one of my favorite movies of all time, and I love Dracula, and I love all those Universal films, the genre needed to change. And by adding a true crime element, which still makes Psycho relevant because true crime is now all the rage.
Yeah.
Psycho was that kind of moment of evolution that the genre needed. By adding in a true crime realism element that then begot the slasher genre, when it needed another evolution after the fact.
And it is ever evolving, which is so exciting. But I think you're right. A ground zero could be traced to this movie, which is just incredible to even think about. So, Adam, let's transition to the final sequence and then final image of this film. We will talk about what we think about it, and then we will sign off and wish everyone a very happy Halloween. So, the final sequence of Psycho. So the psychologist is explaining at the police station to Sam and Lila and some others that Norman was doing everything possible to keep alive the illusion of his mother being alive. When reality came too close, he dressed up like her, walked around like her, and spoke in her voice, trying to be his mother. And now he is. Then he explains that the mother persona is now dominant in Norman, and the Norman persona has been suppressed, possibly permanently. An officer says that Norman, who is in a holding room in the police station, feels a chill and is asking for a blanket. So another officer brings him one. We don't see inside the room, but we hear the mother's voice say, "Thank you," after Norman was given the blanket. We cut to a full-body shot of Norman by himself, sitting on the chair, snuggling in the blanket. The mother's voice speaks, while Norman reacts to the words as he's thinking them, and as the camera slowly dollies in on him, and subtle, higher-pitched strings begin to play. And this is what Mother says. It's sad when a mother has to speak the words that condemn her own son, but I couldn't allow them to believe that I would commit murder. They'll put him away now, as I should have years ago. He was always bad. And in the end, he intended to tell them I killed those girls and that man, as if I could do anything except just sit and stare, like one of his stuffed birds. They can't even move, and I won't. I'll just sit here and be quiet, just in case they do suspect me. They're watching me. Well, let them. Let them see what kind of a person I am. I'm not even going to swat that fly. I hope they are. They'll see. They'll see and they'll know. And they'll say, why, she wouldn't even harm a fly. Then Norman smiles creepily during those last couple lines while looking directly into the lens of the camera. We crossfade from Norman to the car being pulled out of the swamp. In the middle of that crossfade, the mother's skull is superimposed on Norman's face. We see the end title over the final image of the car being winched, out of the swamp, and with a clicking and clacking sound. Then a few intense musical hits, and linear lines wipe that image away. And similar to the opening titles, of course, they give way to black. All right, Adam. So, what do you think of this final sequence and final image? And remind us of your take again.
It's funny enough because I'm trying to go backwards from when we first see Norman show up at the end in the dress, when we finally get to that last really big shock of like who Mother actually is.
Sure.
And as I said previously earlier in the episode, that that whole sequence was the first thing from an older movie that terrified me, especially the reveal of Mother, the petrified corpse.
Yeah.
And Norman kind of running out the knife, and just how chaotic that whole sequence was. And I'll say this about the whole scene with the psychiatrist. I used to hate that scene. I used to hate it because I thought it was very hand wavy. And yes, well, as you can see from our studies and whatnot, it was the thing all along. And why, of course, naturally,
it is very plot dumpy.
It's very plot dumpy, but that's Hitchcock as a populist again.
Yeah.
We got weird guys. We got very weird, but now we're going to bring you in nice and safely for the landing.
Right.
And also I do miss the days of, and why the scene has kind of grown on me in the years since. I miss the days of smart people in a room talking about just smart things that I don't understand quite enough.
Sure, yeah.
And a few things happen in that scene. Lila's reaction to her sister being dead, which it's funny because Vera Miles didn't play it as like she didn't break down crying and oh my God.
Yeah.
Instead, she kind of almost like withdrew into herself. Like she knew this was going to be the outcome, and now she's just more angry at Norman than she is anything else, which of course leads us to Psycho 2, which, short sidebar, far better film than it has any right to be. It's also on Netflix right now. I'm not going to tell you guys it's the greatest thing ever made, but it's still pretty damn good. And I do recommend if you're looking for anything to watch this Halloween season after you watch Psycho. And also trying to explain to people who may have not been as well enlightened, look, Norman is not a transgender character.
Mm-hmm.
Him putting on a dress had nothing to do with him killing these women, killing Arbogast. It was just his coping mechanism for the guilt he felt over killing his mother.
Yeah, they say that pretty straightforwardly in the film itself.
Yet people...
The psychiatrist says, hey, this is not sexual.
Yes, and yet people will still take away the wrong thing, even if the movie's like, no,
or
it's
gender
not
oriented.
that.
I mean, right? Because transgenderism
wasn't
sexual, but it's right.
The fact that Norman put on a dress and a wig and acted like his mother to kill people had nothing to do with orientation or sexuality.
Right.
It was just, again, a coping mechanism for why he did what he did.
Right.
Hitchcock's kind of bringing the audience in for a landing. Here's a psychiatrist who's going to tell you everything you need to know about Norman in this one scene. Yeah. We're going to kind of wrap up all the little things. And in this watch, I forgot, because I remember being younger and feeling that scene was just so long and so boring. And why would Hitchcock put this at the end of this great movie?
Yeah.
The scene is 2 minutes, if that. Mm-hmm. At least that scene. Yeah. And is needed to kind of, again, bring the audience in for a safe landing, because now Hitchcock's going to do his one last twist on everything.
Yeah.
Which is, now we're going to see Norman. And we heard the doctor kind of explain all this and how Norman's kind of now suppressed and now it's only mother. And then the cop comes, hey, looking for a blanket, here you are. And we don't see Norman at first. The cop goes in, we hear a disembodied voice say, thank you. And that's the initial, oh, wait, that doesn't sound right. That one last little disorienting moment.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't sound quite right. And then the speech and Perkins acting, just obviously I'm sure somebody was reading the speech to him off camera.
Yeah.
And just the physical performance of it all. And again, you feel that disorientation, that off-puttingness, that creepiness kind of all come back for this last image.
Yeah.
Though, I'm not even going to swat that fly. And that smile. One of the creepiest things still lives in the culture today.
It does. Longlegs came out not too long ago, and it's a very similar sort of creepy smile from that character as well. Played by Nicolas Cage. Yeah.
And directed by Oz Perkins, Anthony Perkins' son.
Yes. How crazy is that?
Insane.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
And then right when you think, all right, it's over, thank God it's over, that one last little overlay of Mother's skull over Norman.
Yes.
That one last little, did I see that? No, I couldn't have seen that. Oh my God. And you're coming out of the theater shocked, thrilled, creeped out,
Shivering.
probably sleeping with the lights on that night.
Yeah.
Because even with that kind of, I won't call it boring now, but let's, for sake of argument, the kind of dull, boring scene of the exposition dump with the psychiatrist.
Mm-hmm.
Those last two sequences in the police station are the movie as a microcosm. You think it's this. Hey guys, you've seen movies. You know what movies are. We're showing you a movie right now. You're going to get comfortable in this movie. And then something's going to happen and you're going to go, that shouldn't happen. I've seen movies. I know from movies. That should not happen.
Right.
And it kind of leads to the natural conclusion of, Marion kind of resurrected, albeit, you don't see her, but she's literally pulled out from the swamp. And now the mess of consequences that are going to come from that. And Norman is finally, his reign of terror, as it were, put to an end. And
right.
Again, one called a happy ending, but a satisfying one.
Right.
And you can now go home having witnessed and probably having their brains jumbled in 1960. I can only imagine.
Oh, I just wish I was alive. I think I was telling you that I was really trying to rewatch this film for the first rewatch for this episode to really imagine that I was in 1960 in a theater.
I kind of want to see if I can't run into somebody who lived through Psycho and was like, oh yeah, I saw that first run. Holy shit, I did not sleep, for a week. Just to sit down and because again, even that perspective is valuable.
Yeah.
Just maybe that's going to be a goal for the next couple of weeks is try to find somebody who saw that, if not even first run, but even one of those early re-release screenings.
Yeah.
Where it was still fresh in everybody's head and nobody knew what the twist was.
Yeah.
And what you were feeling when you came out of that theater. And were you like, oh my God, I'm going to go home and not sleep for a week, or like a roller coaster, let's go again, and go right back into the theater.
Unbelievable. And then 13 years later, that idea would be on steroids for The Exorcist. But yeah, just to kind of build on that a little bit, the final image, I had a very similar experience to you when I was younger. I found that scene of the information dump by the psychiatrist to be very boring and long, but then I really thought that in these rewatches, yes, the audience did need it, and I like what you were saying about Hitchcock needing to bring them to a landing and saying, all right, we went into the weird, and now I want it to resonate as not just a weird experimental film or an art film in and of itself. I want this to make sense to you. I want the method of the madness to be revealed to you so that it can get in your head about what this guy actually was. And I like how I did that. And I think that the final image rhymes with it. This is the first time that I actually thought about that. I think that he slowly kind of tells them about what Norman is. And the final image is them slowly winching the car out of the swamp. So in both instances, you're slowly pulling the key factor that's going to explain all of this out of the mess itself, isolating it so that you can get your head around what actually happened here. And I think that's an amazing match that they do there. And of course, with Norman, us seeing Norman for the first time, really after knowing the twist, in between those two scenes. You're right. So you have this element of the psychiatrist explaining, then you see Norman as the mother, very creepy, and then the physical representation of that as well. And it's just a very striking kind of match. And then I just wanted to say that the thing that I found so creepy about Norman's, the mother's soliloquy at the end was the fact that it's from the perspective of the mother thinking that she's a different person from Norman still, right? Because she says, "Oh, they're putting him away. They're putting him away. He's bad. He did these things, and he was always a bad boy, but they're not going to get me. I'm not going to show them that I did any. I'm not going to show them any evidence that I had any hand in this, right? I'm just going to convince them that I could never even harm a fly. I'm just an old little lady. But bye-bye, Norman. That sort of just sociopathic, not even feeling for your son kind of a thing.
Right.
So it's the psychotic representation of the mother within the son's head. That's the true psycho. And it's all part of Norman, but you know what I'm saying? Is. Like it's not even the mother thinking, "Oh wow, I get to live with Norman in jail now." It's like, I'm glad that they didn't get me.
Exactly, and you're curious now. It's the like trying to figure out like what happens to the movie like after they cut to black, basically, and what's the next sequence. And to be a fly on the wall in that courtroom. Yeah, when it's like mother trying to do mother, and they're just everyone in the court's like, what the fuck is that?
Yeah.
Okay, well, Mrs. Bates, if you will,
if you were a fly in the courtroom, she would probably try to convince she would convince the jury that she wouldn't hurt you either. Yeah, isn't that nice? So yeah, I just think that what we've handled here today has been quite an incredible feat in cinema, and honestly, I think, Adam, that this movie is. It's like a footprint of human history. It's an art form film that has arrived at a place where we can use this horror genre as something that's more expressive of something personal. I think, like you said in the beginning, there's a sort of Americana element in this. It's very like reflexive of American culture and the American family unit that I think was very bold to do, especially with such a big, legendary filmmaker as Hitchcock, to handle this material and to pioneer it in a certain direction. And you watch this movie, and you might think, oh, maybe it moves this way, or the psychiatrist dumps at the end, or all these kind of things. But again, I urge anyone out there to really imagine that you're in 1960, or at the very least, just consider what this film did. I think in our pre-chat we were talking about, or you were saying how the film, horror before this generally, especially in America, was just like, ray gun sci-fi, and, things were coming to take over the planet. There were giant leeches or giant ants attacking, or just like, or on the other end of the spectrum, there was suspense. There was a killer, but it was just like this sort of suspense thing, and it wraps up nicely, and you solve the mystery and all that.
Or there was always a supernatural element of sorts. There was a vampire. There was a Frankenstein's monster.
Yeah.
There was a wolf man. There was a mummy. And again, love all those movies.
Sure, me too.
But the last of that cycle was the Creature from Black Lagoon movies, and that was 4 years in the ground by the time Psycho was made. So
right.
Need the evolution.
There are no aliens that are invading Earth in any form. There is no supernatural element per se. There's no, fireworks and effects that are driving the story and giving us an H.G. Wellian sort of perspective of the world. No, in this horror movie, the monster, the evil presence, the antagonist, is just a guy who's lonely and repressed and feels disconnected from other fellow Americans, right? And just think about how far that simple and yet completely new at the time idea has stormed into and broken into our culture and paved the way for very personal and creepy sorts of horror elements that followed it. And horror is so much of a part of our culture now, and it will always be successful in the theater. People love to see it and to watch it in all different forms and all of the different personal things that are getting to us or are bothering us in the culture and in society. And it will always be that way, no matter what the iteration is. But we can never forget where it started. And it started with a little movie under $1 million by one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. And the monster itself was the name of the movie. So the fan question for this episode is, what is the most recent movie, image, or piece of media that you've seen that was inspired by the iconography of Psycho? Like we said, it's just ubiquitous. It's everywhere. And in so many more ways even than we probably discussed today. But yeah, what is the most recent thing that you've seen that or heard that you could say we could trace back to Psycho as its origin? I mean, I just can't wait to hear your answers, guys. And please like, comment, and subscribe anywhere you can. Answer this question on whatever channel that you can. I hope that you enjoyed our Halloween series. And we work really, really hard to put these together and to give our time thinking of all the little things and the deep, profound things. And that's why I first have to really thank our amazing guest that's returned time and time again to dazzle us with his wit and his knowledge and his passion about movies in general, but especially ones like this, Psycho. So our own treasured speaking cinema psycho, Adam Seccafico. So Adam, thank you again for coming on and gracing us with your Halloween wisdom.
Thanks for letting me do Psycho, because there was honestly, you can make an argument, but like at the end of the day, it had to be this movie for this episode and for this day specifically.
It did. And as soon as you said it a while ago, like a month ago, I think we figured this out. As soon as you said it, I lit up like a Christmas tree. I was like, this needs to happen. And not even just for the movie itself, for us. I think we personally needed to talk about this movie because it's inspired both of us in so many different ways and inspired the culture. But yeah, you think back about the things that made you want to be a filmmaker, and it's material like this that you can say is a turnkey moment, and it will always be that. And I'm just so happy that Hitchcock has given us this gift for all future generations to appreciate and to understand where certain things in the culture came from. It's so important to have these time capsules. And Psycho is one hell of an amazing time capsule. It really is so part of our culture. So, and a huge thank you to all of our listeners out there for listening to our Halloween series. Just in case this is the only one you've listened to, we do have 2 other movies that we did this month. We did Cube with Jesse Mendelson, and then we did The Ring with John Bewley. And I hope that you found this content useful and enlightening in some way. And if you have, please leave a comment for us or follow, subscribe, share the podcast as much as you can. Get the word out there about Speaking Cinema on whatever platform that you've received this on. We have a TikTok, which is Speaking Cinema Pod. We're on Instagram. Give us a follow and visit us that's Speaking Cinema Podcast. Speaking Cinema Podcast is also our YouTube channel. But go visit Instagram to see 1 week ahead of time a reveal of the next title that's going to be discussed. And once again, I'm just so appreciative that you guys have given your time to us, and we will continue to do so for you if you allow us. Happy Halloween! I'll see you on the next episode.